Hello and welcome to the Amateur Skeptics podcast, number 67. Our topic tonight is going to be adult children of same-sex parents. Joining me this evening, Mac.
Born of man and woman.
Excellent. Ian.
Well, I'd make that same claim, but I don't actually have any evidence outside of the claims my parents have made.
Kimberly.
I'm here, and I had parents. I was not hatched.
Not hatched. Excellent. And our special guest, Michael Clifton.
A bird pooped on a rock and the sun hatched me.
And I am your host, Brian, and I'm pretty sure I was delivered by a stork.
Wait a minute, Michael. Did you come from the bird poop, or did you come from under the rock?
Oh,
I'm
yes.
not clear on the origin story here.
Both.
I grew up on a boat when the world was flooded. How is everybody doing?
I'm doing
Doing all right.
Now, we were supposed to have another special guest this evening, too. Misty was supposed to join us, so she needs a little shaming for not being here.
I'll be watching like a hawk for her to come on Skype. If she pops up, we'll add her.
All right, we'll get her. And but we got a lot of stuff tonight, so let's get started with announcements.
All right, I'll go through these pretty quick. We've got Tuesday, September 18th, the Denver Atheists are doing a social at the Vine Street Pub. It's a great place, and it's just going to be an open discussion kind of hangout. Wednesday, the 19th, is 60 Minutes in Space at the Denver Museum of Nature and Science. The following night, Thursday, the 20th, is Science Lounge. This one's called Whiskey the West. So we like whiskey. That should be fun.
Yeah.
On Friday the 21st, the Humanists on the Move are doing a hike and dinner for the autumnal equinox. The next day, the 22nd, they're doing disc golf over at Expedition Park. On Thursday, September 27th, Mile High Skeptics are doing Light the Walk. I still don't know too much about that. I'm going to try to get more information on that next week. On the 28th, back at the museum, Bacchus Raucous, a party in Pompeii celebrating their new exhibit that's just going to be opening. On Tuesday, October 2nd, Volcanoes on the Verge. Again, part of that Pompeii kind of thing, and volcanoes are cool. It's a little bit connected with maybe tonight's discussion. On Wednesday, October 3rd, the Boulder Atheists are doing their Atheist Classroom series on the history of marriage. October 6th is a Saturday, and CoCore is not really sponsoring it, but kind of trying to get some people together for the We Are Women March. I went to it last year. It was pretty well attended and an important topic, I think, especially given the election year. Thursday the 18th, I wanted to mention this because back at the museum they're doing another science lounge, and this one's on Superheroes Assemble. And I think that has something to do with with the weekend coming up there for Mile High Con. I'm going to turn that over to Ian for info on that.
Well, I bring it up every year. Mile High Con is the Denver area genre fiction convention. They have a bunch of local writers there. I know a few people that check out our podcast, or regular people I meet there. It's a great convention to come. I will be there the whole weekend doing panels and such, although I will be focusing on my writing, not the skeptic part of it. But if you meet me there and want to talk to skeptics, I'm more than willing to.
Excellent. And so, also a quick clarification regarding Glenn's email?
Yeah, Glenn, he's the one who, a little while back, sent us the email about his friend, who they're having the weird discussion about vaccine, and it got kind of weird because the friend was saying something about, well, couldn't vaccines be considered the cause of autism because more kids are surviving who get autism? But Glenn sent us an email to clarify that his friend himself believes in vaccines. His friend apparently was a little upset, and his friend is now a regular listener to our podcast. So we want to make sure we clarify that. His friend does believe in vaccines. This was just a hypothetical argument they had come up with. And so, we want to make sure we clear that up and bring up, anytime you guys give us feedback, we love to reply on it and make sure you know we're listening to you. So,
we had a
little
bit.
Wait, hold on a second. So his friend was upset and is now a regular listener?
Yes.
He
so
wasn't
what we
upset
need
with
to do
us.
is actually individually piss people off.
No. I think that what the upsetting thing was that they were having a hypothetical discussion, but that wasn't necessarily how it was posed to us.
Yes.
And so we were responding to it in a manner that was different than the original context.
Right. But apparently he got his friend to start listening to the podcast, and he says his friend's hooked on it. And so it's like, well, the least we can do is say, thank you for listening to the podcast. We understand. We just took your question literally and looked at it from someone actually arguing that point as if they really believed in it. So.
Yep. Glenn and friend, welcome.
Yeah. So,
I've got some announcements too.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay, for Colorado Springs, tomorrow there will be the Colorado Springs Bodhi Mind Meetup Group will have a Buddhist meditation if you want to see what that's like. And also, at the same time, the Pueblo Awakening Group will have a prayer service for peace. But this is a Unitarian-style prayer service. So everyone, even non-believers, are welcome. Also, on Wednesday, the Colorado Springs Magical Community will celebrate Woman Song. And on Saturday, Coven of the Five Elements will be having their coffee social. And on, September 23rd, Pikes Peak Skeptics Society will have their Secular Sundays brunch. And this one will be at the Eastside Panera in Colorado Springs. And that's all.
Right, well, send us the links to those so we can throw them in the document.
Will do.
Way, hopefully our listeners know this. Go to our website, and we have links to all these events with the podcast notes. So if you've been wondering about getting to them, go to the website and check it out. That's where we have the information.
And of course, this podcast won't probably be up till Wednesday.
Yeah, so the first few of those, regretfully, people probably missed.
Yeah,
but hopefully they'll get to that Saturday one.
And they're good to know about because it sounds like they're kind of regular things down there. So
absolutely,
if you miss this one, get to the next one.
All right, so Kimberly.
Of course, for our Gallifreyan listeners who are downloading this tonight on Wednesday.
Well, Gallifrey's been destroyed.
Oh, boy. All right, so several of us, myself and Kimberly and Michael, all went to the Atheist Alliance of America conference, the Ascension of Atheism. I guess it was 2 weekends ago now. I think we had a great time. Kimberly, of course, was busy. She was,
I did some running around.
Yeah.
And aren't you guys glad I'm not mentioning it as coming up anymore? Yeah. I mean, I realized that you had to listen to me say that about 1,000 times over the last couple of months. But, I didn't get to see too much, but I was putting out fires all over the place, but I'm even mentioned to somebody that weekend. It seemed like impossible situations came up and were just almost magically taken care of. Things really just kind of fell into place. So it was really good that way.
The cool thing for me was having listeners come up and say hi, and a few of them did, and that was pretty neat. Yeah.
Who'd you meet? Any names you can share?
I don't know. I mean, I tell you, two of them were named Robert, and and the other gentleman, I unfortunately can't remember his name. I don't think I wrote it down. But so I met 3 people, and 2 of which are named Robert. So 2/3 of our listeners are named Robert. Yeah, fascinating.
What are we doing right with Roberts?
I don't know. What's that?
I think that's a flawed study.
You think so?
I think the sample size is not sufficient.
Okay. I always joke, about us having only our 3 listeners, and so it is kind of funny that 3 of them came up and said hi to me while I was there. So that was pretty neat. That was fun. And I'll tell you what, I felt like I was running for office because it was like, hi, my name is Brian. Here's my card. Hi, my name is Brian. Here's my card.
Yeah.
So I think most people that I met got a card.
I know that I got a card for you.
You did? Yeah. Well, and you were there with me most of the time. I was pretty consistent, wasn't I? Mm-hmm. So I was out, promoting, fighting the good fight. But it was a lot of fun.
And the cards look great, by the way, too.
Oh,
so any listeners who want to win one, all you have to do is email us with an address, and we will ship you a card if you are the one of 1,000 lucky winners.
I'm
making promises.
Yeah, you're making a check we can't cash. But the other thing is that I had a shirt made for this. And, when I made the shirt, I published it on Facebook, and so people could go and have that shirt made. So there you go.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, the artwork is up there, and through Cafe Press, you can make anything into a shirt. So, and as long as they aren't reselling it, it's perfectly legal. I gotta tell you.
All right. So, but otherwise, you got to see a lot more of the convention.
I did.
It wasn't just the amateur skeptics at the Atheist.
No. It certainly wasn't. It was.
What was the best one for you?
I don't know. There was a lot of good talks, and I couldn't tell you who the best was. I'll tell you the ones, of course, that with the whole Atheism Plus stuff going on, all that was interesting. I gotta say, Mikey Weinstein was probably the best one.
Yeah, he was great.
And what he's doing with the military religious, I can't remember.
MRFF,
Yeah,
Military Religious Freedom Foundation.
Yeah, it is pretty neat, and that was pretty funny because I knew the hotel and I knew the room that we were going to, because we have a local, I'm a member of a seismic association, and or at least the company is, and so every year they have a lunch for us, and it's always in the same place in that hotel, and so I'm leading a bunch of people over there, and there's one guy who has 2 guards, and we're like, what's that all about, and then they wouldn't let us on the elevator with him, and that turned out to be Mikey Weinstein, and so his he had 2 guards with him the whole night, surveying the room and everything.
Wow.
And what's that?
Here in Colorado Springs, he was at a local bookstore, and he not only had his bodyguards, but the police surrounded the area.
Really?
Yeah.
He gets a lot of threats. In fact, what did he say?
Bad.
He said he got 10 about coming to this conference, and he got 1 when they landed at the airport, and 1 in the hotel room just before he came up to speak. So,
in his book, No Snowflake in an Avalanche, he outlines how he's even had his dog killed on his premises, and that's really depressing.
Yeah.
And definitely a great speaker, though.
Yeah, he was. And of course, I got to meet a lot of people. I met Greta Christina, and so that was pretty neat. I got to talk to her. I met another gentleman by the name of Jeff Satterwhite, and we're gonna have him on. We're gonna probably have Greta Christina too on the show, and Jeff. And Jeff is a member of the Clergy Project, so he's just now going public. He told his parents last week that he was an atheist, and I asked him, so how'd that go? He goes, not well.
Oh.
So he's having a rough time with that. Robert Walker, actually, and his talk was fun too. I enjoyed that. And he's a cockpit atheist is his handle. He was there.
I drove him in from the airport. Really sweet kid.
Yeah, he was nice. And then what is it? Jamila
Bay?
Yeah.
Jamila Bay.
Yeah, she is a pretty neat lady too. And her talk was a lot of fun. So yeah, I met a lot of people, and I also met Seth Andrews from the Thinking Atheist podcast, and that was fun.
Character.
Yeah. Well, I had wanted to talk to him because he got ambushed on Skeptico, and do you guys know what Skeptico is?
Just from you, I still have not gotten a chance to listen to it.
Yeah, and it's one of those ones. You listen to a couple of them, and you realize that it's all about consciousness, and at some point in the interview, Seth asks him, Is that all you talk? Is that the only thing you guys talk about, or that you talk about on your podcast? Is consciousness? And of course, well, yeah, of course, because that's the most important question. Does consciousness survive death? And so I asked him. I said, how did you do this? He said, I didn't vet the guy, and so that was a really good conversation. And in the end, and they, he wants Alex Satyris wants him to come back, right, and do a second part of this interview. And at the end, he decided he wouldn't come back, and, Alex Satyris is like, you're gonna lose credibility, yada yada. I'm like, he's not gonna lose credibility. You bring him onto your show, and he loves to do this to skeptics. He brings them on the show, and then he ambushes them, right? And so he's counting on the fact that they haven't vetted him, in most cases, I can't remember. Novella, Steve Novella, of course, knew who he was and was more prepared. And I think even, Karen Stoles now was more prepared, but still kind of got ambushed with, but she was very good at saying, listen, that's not my field. And, there is one set of, events that, you guys need to keep your eyes out for. On October 14th, I believe, Richard Dawkins will be flying into the state, and then on the 15th and 16th, he's supposed to have some events. Okay. Those haven't been announced yet, but I do have that on good authority from the Richard Dawkins Foundation. All right, well, cool. We will definitely do that. So anyway, I had a good talk with Seth, and I told him, don't go back. I said, don't do it. I mean, how can he lose any credibility by not going back, really? He's not going to lose credibility with me. And he's not going to lose, he can't lose any more credibility with the people he didn't have credibility with in the first place.
That's a good point.
Yeah, so I think he can only lose by going back on. So,
So this Skeptico podcast pretends to be a skeptics podcast, but is really a believer or a woo believer podcast?
He claims that he's following the evidence, but he likes to look at fringe stuff that hasn't been fully vetted and isn't supported and isn't completely at this point peer reviewed and certainly not mainstream. And since what he does is
how can you consider does consciousness survive after death to be something that's following the evidence?
Well, because he's looking at NDEs, he's looking at near-death experiences, and they're looking at those anecdotes and trying to form data from them, which I am skeptical of the whole modality of getting reasonable data from there, but they make a lot of claims, and there are some researchers that are doing it, some better than others, but what he doesn't do, it seems to me, is look at get your premier neurologists and stuff like that on the show to talk about how these pieces, that we can't explain the whole thing. It's one of those deals where because science can't explain it, this has to be the answer type of thing. And but he's not looking at like each component. What can we explain of that experience with brain research? He really does not go down.
Near-death experience is not death.
Well, and I tend to agree with that as well. That is one of the assessments that I have. But there are some interesting cases where these people do seem to be hyper aware when they're in this near-death experience state that we do not have an explanation for, right? But that's as far as I think you can really go, is we can't explain that, right? Because they don't have a mechanism other than it's supernatural, consciousness survives death, and this is the proof. Well, even if that's true, for how long? Where is it going to go? There's a lot of stuff that they can't answer either, so they must be wrong because they can't answer that stuff.
I guess I need to see some more of the evidence that you're talking about, because everything I've seen has been very summarily dismissed as just that's what the brain does without oxygen. Congratulations.
He does talk to these researchers, but what he does, if you're a skeptic, he comes on and he just wants to talk about the one thing. Like Seth Andrews thought he was going on to talk about what he does, because he was invited onto another podcast, so if Dorsey's thinking the guy's interested in what he does, right? Because if we ask somebody onto this show, we want to know what they do. We didn't have Garth Sundem on and ask him about, mealworms. Right? It wasn't his field. We asked him about his book.
We gave this guy too much time anyway. He's
all right, I'm sorry.
And I don't want to talk about it.
Okay. I could go on, clearly. I'm sorry.
So the follow-up on the animal trafficking thing.
Yes, what is that?
Oh, this was just a story that came in today, I think, or was updated, I guess, today. And it was just a little bit more about the animal trafficking. The NYPD uncovered a stash of exotic animals. It was sent to me. I just thought I wanted to share it since we went over it an episode or two ago, and it does happen, and it's that unregulated market we talked about.
I kind of got the impression, though, that that stash of exotic animals wasn't being sold. I got the impression they were pets.
Well, they had to have been sold at one point, right?
Well, yeah. But all those things that they mentioned, except the alligators, are legal to sell. They weren't legal to have where he had them. But bearded dragons are legal. Pythons, boas, those are legal. I kind of took issue with them referring to pythons and boas as being
hold on. You cannot say pythons and boas are legal. That is that's not true. There are certain boas and pythons that are legal, but there is a lot that are not legal. Many that are not legal.
Okay. All right. So I'm overgeneralizing.
Yeah.
But they didn't give specific on the species he had there anyway. They said 5 deadly snakes, including boas and pythons.
Well, and your deadly snakes are generally, not trafficable. Boas and pythons. Like a red-tailed boa, your common boa, is certainly. Most of those are born in captivity at this point anyway. But there are more exotic species that are only caught in the wild.
Okay. Are there any snakes that are vegetarian?
No, they're real animals.
So technically they're all deadly snakes to something.
Excellent. Yes. All right. How to tell if your religious liberties are being repressed. Ian?
Well, this was just something I want in there for any of our listeners who have friends and family that often talk, the Christian ones who we're being repressed because of whatever. Have them take this test. It's a very well done test that gives 10 questions, and it's multiple choice, A or B. And I'll just question number 8. My religious liberty is at risk because A, another religious group has been declared the official faith of my country, or B, my own religious group is not given status as the official faith of my country. And all the questions are basically like that. And at the end it says if you've answered A to any question, then perhaps your religious liberty is indeed at stake. You and your faith group have every right to advocate for equal protection. But just remember this one little constitutional concept. That means that you can fight for your equality, not your superiority. And it says, if you answered B to any question, then not only is your religious liberty not at stake, but there is a strong chance that you are oppressing the religious liberties of others. This is the point where I would invite you to refer back to the tenets of your faith, especially the ones about your neighbors. But it just, and especially with a lot of stuff we talk about, this fits in, like tonight, the main topic, the people who, are against the same-sex unions and such, same-sex parenting, are generally the ones who will say that because of same-sex parenting, their liberties are being attacked. How dare you attack my religion by allowing this stuff to happen? And so I figured this was a very fitting thing to make sure people could check out.
All right.
Yep, it's a good article.
All right. Let's move on to our main topic. And so this is an article published in Social Science Research, and the name of it is How Different Are Adult Parents or are Adult Children of Parents Who Have Same-Sex Relationships? Findings from the New Family Structures Study. So this is, and it was done by Mark.
I'm guessing it's Rigneris.
Rigneris? Okay.
Yeah, it's not douchebag like you pronounced it earlier. I think it's actually Rigneris.
And he's at a university in Texas.
Right.
University of Texas, Austin. And so he did a research paper where he looked at he's been, I mean, of course, he cites a lot of sources in the beginning, talking about other research that has been done, and he talks about the flaws in methodology in those other ones, specifically looking at lesbian parents raising children, who in a lot of these studies either show no difference or they sometimes will show a positive outcome for two women raising a child. And he points out that there's some bias in these studies and some questionable methodology. And he specifically, let's see about that. Sorry, I have a lot of notes on this. Well, he was specifically talking about how these studies, they were that it was the mother's self-reporting for the children.
Okay.
So the idea is that because they're telling other people how well their child is doing, that there's some bias there, and that's, I mean, okay, great. That's a reasonable
thing to say. Every mom is going to say their children are doing great,
right?
And kids may say something entirely different,
right? So I started thinking about this. Okay, so if we're going to do a study like this, I started thinking about what are the factors that need to be involved for coming up with valid criteria in the end. And so some of the factors that I thought needed to be looked at were income, social status. So, how accepting is the community of these same-sex couples? Support from family, brothers, sisters, grandparents, etc. I thought would be important. I thought race would be a factor that should probably be looked at. And then what's that?
Shouldn't be.
It shouldn't. Really? Because you don't think that race is a demographic that we should look at when we're looking at these?
You could eliminate the word race and insert a variable of how much the community around them is supportive, but how are you going to measure that versus just noting what race they are? It's very hard to measure how supportive the family is.
You're dealing with a homosexual couple to begin with, so it'd be hard to measure exactly how their race has anything to do with it.
Okay.
If you go with race, you're generalizing the beliefs of that race, and that's a pretty slippery damn slope, Brian.
Okay.
I don't like it.
Well, I mean, but
I think it's a pretty salient factor in any kind of demographic research. And that's all we're doing here. We are not talking about individuals. We are talking about data.
Thank you. And that was my opinion as well, that we are doing demographic research here. Okay,
we can pretend we're all colorblind, but
No, but we're
race
not.
matters in any demographic study. I mean, it's demographics. That's how you break people down into discrete categories for analysis. It's not saying anybody's doing anything wrong. It's just that's how demographic research is done.
Well, but don't we do this all the time? We compare white families raising children to black families raising children in studies all the time.
Doesn't make it right.
What do you mean? What's not right about it? I mean, these exist. We're not talking about what our ideal world is. There are black communities and there are white communities, and whether we like it or not doesn't change the fact that they exist.
Don't like it.
And from existing
like it,
demographics data, you could probably make the assumption that different races are more or less likely to have a grandparent involved if it's a lesbian couple. You know, and that sort of support system whereby, a certain demographic just does not, on average support in between generations in our country. That is very important to know. And it's very important to point it out for being wrong.
Yeah, I don't think that I'm justifying it by including it in my list of criteria. I'm just acknowledging the fact that it exists.
Okay, I'll drop it.
I don't know. Michael, it sounds like I'm on sound footing with that.
I would say so, and at the end of every study, the researchers have plenty of room at the end to put in some social criticism and say how wrong it is. And I would expect that social criticism to be there in a good study. Okay.
And then the other one, I know that this one is difficult, but I thought social status, and when I'm talking about that, I'm talking about is your community accepting of your relationship? So cause I thought what I was thinking when I put that on there was like, I have, my daughter has a friend who has two moms, and we go to the open school, and in that environment, that's perfectly fine. Very acceptable. But if we were to take that and put that in a school, and I don't know, I would use Cherry Creek as an example, but maybe that's not even good. I don't know.
A small school in Nebraska.
There you go. Where that's not acceptable, that child might have a harder time, and they might have a harder time in their community, depending on how people felt about their relationship. And I thought that, I don't know how I would measure that, perhaps, but I thought that it should at least be acknowledged that can make a difference.
If you studied the city where the respondent grew up and charted that out on a map, you'd probably get what you're looking for.
Okay. So what have I forgotten?
And if I understand right, you're asking if I were to do this study, what kind of criteria would I study, right?
And he has 40 others. I mean, he has a bunch of other stuff, but I'm just talking about overall. I mean, and there's probably way more. In fact, he's got way more in this study, but I thought these were important.
Yeah. Well, to me, one of the bigger problems is the size of any possible test group you have. It's still not. I don't have all the information, but I know that it's still not popular enough to really have that huge of an amount of people that have been raised to adulthood in same-sex couples.
Okay.
So you have a very, very limited amount of people to work from, which definitely makes it very hard to be able to do any kind of study like this.
In his study, he surveyed ages 18 to 39. He had just under 3,000 people in his survey group. But there's a caveat here.
Okay.
Only 175 of those are reported mothers who had same-sex romantic relationships. It's only 5%. And only 2% was only 2%, 73 who reported, growing up. And then he had criteria for how long they lived with that with their mother or father's partner. And certainly this study does not address same-sex couples that are stable who have decided to have a children, whether that child is adopted or biological.
So this study actually, I think, would be better in 20, 30 years with how popular this is now becoming. So then in 20, 30 years, we'll have a much better group to work with to research from.
Yeah. So this particular study was, it really does not, it doesn't address children growing up in a stable home with, two mothers or two fathers. And
which is a much more common thing nowadays.
That's fine. Yeah, we can, go ahead, Kimberly.
Well, I was just saying, for our listeners, let's talk about what the study did say.
Okay,
and
great.
then, because you're kind of already kind of prepping the why we don't accept the conclusions, and we haven't even gotten to what they are yet.
No. Well, I was basically just going through the beginning of this, talking about the demographics that they studied, and how many of each, right? Okay, you're right. I am kind of getting into that. The study ultimately is looking at a stable heterosexual biological family compared to a broken family that the mother or father ended up in a relationship with same sex, or was or a divorced mother raising children or a divorced father raising children, and it also included in there adopted parents and how they fared. And so he has his, and I was thinking that was the other thing that I was going through, thinking about what are the possible couplings that you could have, like, because you can have a.
There's one confounding that I'm seeing in that in the study they had the frequency of being arrested, right? Well, one thing that the study doesn't talk about is that homosexual couples, or homosexual people in general, will tend to gravitate towards metro areas where there is a higher concentration of police. So whereas you have a poor family in a rural town that might not see a policeman even once a year,
Mm-hmm.
you're dealing with metropolitan people.
Right.
And that's one thing that's just completely not in the study.
Okay, so he missed that.
Yes.
Brian, you were asking about permutations of different types of couples. There's a lot of genders out there that I don't think that this study even touched upon.
No, I didn't even touch. Okay, so I was thinking. So there's heterosexual, biological, right? Heterosexual, divorced, divorced with a biological child. Then you can have a heterosexual couple that has heterosexual couple that is adopted. You can end up with a heterosexual divorced couple that adopted. You can have a heterosexual couple that is remarried, male or female. Then you can have two men that decided to raise a child. You can have two women that decided to raise a child. You can have a woman that divorced and is now married to a woman, raising children. I mean, it goes on and on. And so he did have to limit it. And so he ends up with.
He ends up with a column called All Other. That he sticks
all other
those different permutations in.
So he has the single parent home, the step family. He has divorced late, so after 18. Adopted by a stranger, gay mother, gay father, and heterosexual biological family is what he ends up breaking it down with. And then they go through and this one I still don't get. What is the p-value? Can you explain that to me, Michael?
Population.
Is that what the p-value is?
Yes. Okay.
So they're looking for a p-value greater than 0.05%.
I thought that was the confidence value. Like, there's statistical ways of determining whether or not your sample size was big enough and fell within the standard deviation enough that it could be relied upon.
There you go. That's what I was looking for when I was looking for the p-value. So they're looking for a p-value of greater than 0.05%. Or so I guess 5%.
And that's standard. You typically in statistics throw out things that don't have that much confidence. That's saying that you basically have 95% confidence that these numbers are legitimate for the population that you study.
Okay, right. So as they're going through this, he finds, and most of the statistical values they have are lesbians versus your intact biological family. That's where he finds most of them, but that's also where he had the majority of people to answer the questions. I guess that's not true. I should take that back. Because there were certainly adopted families and divorced families, which I don't remember them saying in this what the percentages for all of those were. So it seems like this report is certainly not all of the data. This is definitely summed up from what the report that he sent to peer reviewers was. Anybody else get that impression?
Absolutely, based on all of the different news stories written about this study.
And that's the other thing that I was going to get to, because, they talked about how there was only 2 couples that actually were, like, raising a child together in this study. All the rest of them were broken homes. And so you end up basically looking at the biological heterosexual family versus some sort of broken family or an intact adopted family. And so he finds all of these differences. And I don't know, do we want to go too much into all the differences?
I don't think so.
I don't think so either. I mean, people could go look up the study and look at
Don't
these.
really have time.
They've got a link to look up the study, so.
The things I'd like to point out are, 1, how sex negative this whole study is.
Okay.
Okay, it is considered you are the higher number of sex partners you've had in your life when you took this study basically correlates to how bad a person you are. So if you they basically have numbers in here about how many the average person has, and that depending on which category you're in, you might have more or less partners on average.
Right.
So, I mean, there's that, conservative, like that's being cited as, well, obviously these kids are worse off. So that's an interesting quiet bias.
So you would call that a judgment call more than fact.
Yeah.
And I would tend to
Well,
agree with that.
it might be a fact, but it's being promoted in a way that seems to call into question what their motives are.
Okay. Michael?
This isn't the only type of study that you would find that in. And in the DSM, you would actually find some mental disorders where the number of sexual partners a person has had in a given period of time is something that they would take into consideration as far as mental health. So I think it's something important to look at. It's the presentation that this guy has when he labels people as having more partners in certain categories. I think that's what's important. He really does have it bolded that, hey, guess what? This is the group that's most likely to be sexually promiscuous.
So, Michael, is he basically kind of tarring them as being mentally ill by implying the number of sexual partners?
Within the community that would understand what he's writing, yes.
Okay.
That's interesting.
So
it's a quiet bias also. It's a sneaky bias.
Well, it's a bias in the DSM, and I would say that this has a lot to do, in my opinion, with with the way that we view sex in general. And that we, instead of having a healthy view of it, that a lot of times we have a negative view of it. Oh, I lost somebody.
No, you didn't lose anybody. Hold on.
No, I think we lost Michael.
We lost Michael. Pause this. So to sum up what I was saying, basically I don't think that we always have the most healthy view of sex in this culture.
No, we don't.
No.
And
if it's anything other than a vanilla missionary position, it's treated as if it's some sort of perversion in most cases.
Right. So, and I think that is a bias of the DSM. But I think that you kind of have to use the DSM when you're doing this kind of research.
And you just have to understand that historically the DSM has been very sex negative and very anti-gay.
Right. It wasn't.
It was only in the 70s where being gay got removed from the DSM as a malady. So it still has some room to grow.
Sounds to me like they should be using the Kinsey report more than the DSM.
Yeah.
Okay. So is there anything in here that is like demonstrably a problem? Is there anything in here where it's like we are demonstrably screwing up children in any of these demographics?
Are you asking for opinion?
I'm asking for opinion.
Or do you think that's what they're concluding?
I mean, I don't. In their conclusion, they were quite vague, I think, about this whole thing. They ultimately say that the gold standard is a heterosexual biological family, and that everything else is subpar, and it has all of these differences. But not all of these differences are necessarily bad. I mean, look at 2 men raising children and voting averages.
We've had the single mom and her mother or father or someone else raising the kids. They weren't necessarily even in a relationship. Historically, you can go back and see that what we consider the atomic family is not really always been there. They've had so many different variations of it, and even traditionally in a marriage, you would have parents and other tribal stuff, all sorts of different things, and to try and say, okay, we're going to get it down to saying somehow concluding that just the man and woman is the only way to go to be healthy. It's like that goes against history. We know from history that there's no set pattern. I think it has nothing to do with sex or anything. It all has to do with just how you do the parenting. And to try and conclude anything is silly.
But that's what sociology research is trying to do.
Right.
And one of the things that I think that this study is being misused is to come out and say, well, see, this study says that gays raising parents is harmful to the child. And I don't think it says that. They even in the conclusion, they don't necessarily say that. They do say that the child is best in a heterosexual biological family. I think they do say that in their conclusion, and then they show the variance in all of these other situations. But I don't think that they show demonstrable harm in any way whatsoever.
Well, as far as
they're trying to, if you look at the chart, the intact biofamily, in none of the things that they display on the chart, is there any evidence that any other group does better than the intact biofamily in any category anywhere on that chart. And there are things that are not on that chart, such as GPA, which would have been a no-brainer. You should include, well, how did they do in school?
Right. And the other one that...
And you don't see that on the chart because they don't want to show things like that.
The other one that's biased is is voting. So they show intact biological family at 57%. Then they show two fathers at 73%, those people voting. And then the only one that they consider statistically significant is that two mothers, their children only vote 41%. That's the one that's significant. The one that sticks out, that is lower than the heterosexual family. So you're right. So there is some stuff in here that is statistically significant that does show in certain situations the heterosexual family does not do as well. But they don't mark any of those as significant. So it is severely biased towards the heterosexual couple.
It makes me wonder about Regnerus's family. What kind of a family background he came from.
I don't even want to go there.
How many of us here are products of a broken home, if you will? I know I officially am.
Yeah, I am.
I am.
I am.
So
Mac is not.
I cannot chime in on that one.
Yeah. Are we all jacked up then?
No, yes. I think Max is jacked up as any of us.
Yeah, I'm absolutely as jacked up as any of you.
But that's an interesting point, right? I don't think that Mac is any better or worse off than I am.
Yeah.
In most of these categories that they're talking about, we have a difference of opinion on a lot of things, and that may have to do with our childhood. But I think that they're reaching here.
Technically, I had 4 female parents.
No wonder you're so screwed up.
Yep, I had a mom and 3 sisters, and the 3 sisters did a lot of the parenting.
Sure.
I can definitely say when my sister tried to parent for me, she really messed me up.
There's one here that especially disturbs me on this chart, and it's if you've ever been forced to have sex against your will. Basically, it's saying if you have anything other than 2 biological intact parents in your family, you are more likely to get raped. Whereas if they would have just looked at geographic location and whether or not these people are in metro areas, that would raise their chance of getting raped, and show that this is really a confounding of what they're showing. To say that just because you had some gay parents that you're more likely to get raped, how does that work? How do you make the connection? Where is the causation there?
You can't.
It's not.
And I think I need to chime in on this from the standpoint of coming from a unbroken biological. And every time you say biological parents, I keep picturing non-biological parents in my mind. They're powerful androids. As one who comes from a non-broken biological family, if I were asked how my growing up went, I think that the term "lie like a rug" probably comes into my answer somewhere. I think that I would tend to, I may be less honest with my answer because I do come from that from that culture where I'm basically I'm a white 40s male adult from white parents who came from the 40s.
Well, from everything I've learned, I'm glad I come from a broken home. I think if my parents had stayed together, they would not have been happy and things would have been really messed up. And I probably would have ended up in worse shape. So,
honestly, Ian, a lot of that broken part of the home happened after you had the kids, though. They broke quite a bit.
Here's another one that they didn't feel was significantly is that the alcohol abuse was much lower amongst lesbian mothers. Children.
Interesting.
Where it was pretty much the same amongst the heterosexual and the and gay fathers. Adopted, pretty much the same. Divorced, oddly enough, late divorced kids were slightly less likely to drink. Step parents about the same as divorced. Single parents about the norm. So they didn't consider that significant either. So there's a lot. So clearly there's a lot of stuff in here that they just. Their baseline was the heterosexual family. That was their norm, their gold standard. And if it deviated from that, that's what they showed us.
Right, which does not seem to go with the actual statistics in the world. Like, unfortunately, 8% of the general population, regardless of where you come from, unfortunately, it's a lot higher than that have been sexually abused. So it doesn't seem like that might be what they came up with as their norm, but that's not society's norm.
Right. But the other thing is that I don't really think that they covered economics like they should. They asked the question, but I mean, let's face it. We know that children of more affluent, there's differences between, low income, middle income, and high income, children, that they turn out differently in each of those demographics.
They do.
And
I think it almost always turns out that economics has a lot more to do with sociological statistics than any other single factor.
And I would tend to agree with that. And that's one of the flaws that I see in this study. And amongst many other is that they don't take into it the consideration that a lesbian couple or gay couple in different economic ranges will have different effects on the kids. And that, and what I think this does maybe show us is that a stable family is always better than a broken one. But we already knew that.
Yeah.
One of the things that we know here in Colorado Springs, as far as abstinence education, is when Focus on the Family moved here, they pushed for it very largely in schools. And the school districts that are around Focus on the Family on the north side of Colorado Springs, they all had an increase in chlamydia rates that just skyrocketed because they weren't teaching enough in their sex ed classes. And from this study, you would think that the stereotypical Christian one-man, one-woman family as a role model is the best role model, and that all other alternative relationships are very bad for you to show a child. That's what it seems like it's trying to say. Mm-hmm. And that completely flies in the face of what we know happens when you don't teach kids that it's okay to have these other types of relationships.
Well, and we've certainly covered abstinence-only education and shown what a failure it is.
Yes. Yep. Well, you can see where they're trying to say that the parents that are the intact biological family are, they have children who have had less sexually transmitted infections. And that just does not seem to be the trend as far as from an educational standpoint, if that's all you're presenting as a role model to children,
Right.
It seems a bit fishy to me.
A lot of the numbers really do. And I guess what really comes back to for me is that this guy apparently has a ton of data. We'll give him that. It may not be collected in all the ways that we would like to. But the fact that of all this data, that it seems like another one of these cases where he already had the title for his article and he got some data so that he could say it.
He got the data and fed it to prove it?
Yeah, well, I don't know that he proves a whole lot, and like Brian pointed out, he doesn't even think he proved a lot.
No, he doesn't.
But it seems like he had the title of his article before he had the data.
Okay, part of what he says right from the beginning that he is doing is that he wants to take a look at the results of parents, of children that were raised in these different family structures, from 18 to 39. But he says right from the start, in here that you can't compare it to what's happening right now, that the family structures have changed in the last 20 years. He's very clear that lesbian couples are choosing to raise a child now together, where it wasn't happening as much. He couldn't get that demographic. But now, as that's becoming a more common thing, that study can be done in 20 years, but it can't be done now. And he admits that in the article. So he goes through this, and I think that they really want to show a difference, a demonstrable harm. But I don't feel that he succeeded. I know that they tried to make that case, but even he doesn't make it very strongly in his conclusion. And ultimately, there's a reality here, and that these children and their parents ended up in these relationships much by circumstance. They probably didn't intend to go and get divorced and necessarily end up in a same-sex relationship after that, right? And maybe they did, but what we need to know is, how do we help these children as best possible? Because the reality of the situation is that every single one of these family structures that he outlines is going to happen.
Right.
So how do we help people in the best way is really what we should be talking about here. We should be, because I'm okay with identifying the differences and where we have weak spots. But what is happening with this study is that these anti-gay and lesbian reports and stuff like that are trying to use this to show that gay and lesbians shouldn't be adopting children. And that's really what they want to use this for. And he had to go through an ethics review because people really were, they were saying that this was unethical, the way he did it was terrible. But ultimately, I don't think that he was, I agree with the university that he was not, it wasn't scientific misconduct, right? And it didn't suffer from anything that a typical sociology study suffers from. We have a problem with sociology studies in general, in that they lack in methodology, that they are not as tight as we need them to be to get really good data from them. And this was no worse than a lot of the others. So and he also says that this wasn't a peer review study, it was just a commentary, which is a problem in itself, because you read this and it says it's a study. And I expect it to be a study, but it's a commentary based on what he's said in other articles now.
Okay. As far as the university deciding it's not scientific misconduct, this is the University of Texas. They decided not to do a formal inquiry, but doesn't a formal inquiry down in Texas involve two men in the street and filling their hands?
It includes a duel, in which they didn't do. But here's the thing, is that by saying that he wasn't guilty of scientific misconduct doesn't say that his study's not still crap, right? It doesn't validate the study, but they're
just saying that he didn't do anything really wrong.
That's exactly right,
but that's
not how these people are misreporting this. They're saying, "Oh, see, he wasn't guilty, so the study is valid." It doesn't make it a good study. It just means that he wasn't negligent.
Well, and here is what for me is the conclusion of all of this. Let's say he did do it right. Let's say the data does show that that these families, when you have an apples to apples situation, they're better off if they're raised by intact biological families. The problem I've got is it's being used for a political agenda that shouldn't be decided this way. Like you say, if you want to go ahead and use the data to decide laws, then the first thing you're doing is outlawing divorce.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, that's the thing.
If you're not willing to go there, then shut the fuck up about the rest of it, right?
Oh no, divorce has done more to damage the parental marital system than marriage equality is going to do or anything like that. So yeah, if you're going to look at how are we going to fix it, that'd be the first thing you do. And the problem is, you do that, you're going to have couples killing each other.
Right.
I've seen.
Well, then you have non-intact biological families.
Yeah, what happens if somebody, someone's killed in a car accident? Do you exterminate the rest of the family because they're not going to be optimal anymore?
Yeah.
Wait,
I mean,
wait,
it gets
is that an option?
ridiculous to even think that we can use a sociological study like this to make comment on what families should be. And I think that's where I get the most pissed off on it. Because this comes like astrology, you know? You have all these data points and stuff, and it looks all really scientific, and you're like, oh, look, I mean, it's not like they just picked these numbers out of the air. It's based on this angle and blah, 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 and bullshit. It doesn't matter in the end.
Right.
If you're really making your choices on how to live life and how to construct your society and what you'll accept and what laws you'll pass based on this information, valid, not valid, it's ignorant to me. And it's just purely filling an agenda kind of.
From a personal experience, I've seen heterosexual couples who have biological children who have no business whatsoever being together. They can't stand each other, they don't work, and they mess up their kids because of it, because they're going to stay together because that's the right thing to do for the kids. Like, no, if you guys are going to be fighting all the time and can't live with each other, it's not the right thing to do for the kid. It's actually going to cause more harm. Break up, get away from each other, but be reasonable, be sensible, make sure what you're doing is about protecting the kids. Just because you guys can't get along anymore doesn't mean you have to fight all the time when you're, states apart. But, this whole idea that you have, the biological couples are always going to be great. No, I've seen way too many times where divorce is the best thing for a family.
Yeah.
Let me point out a couple more things about this study. It was not a long-term study. It's not a peer-reviewed study. It was done over 2 days where they collected this data and decided what to keep in it. And of course, it's all self-reported, right? There's nothing here where that we can say the way that they reported things is actually the way that it was. So there's really nothing to test here. It's a commentary.
And again, it seems to me to be a politically motivated commentary.
I don't know.
They knew exactly what they were doing.
And you might be right.
I think to suggest we just put the information out there. People draw their own. No, this has got Karl Rovian agenda written all over it. This was
Especially
extremely well crafted to have exactly the reaction.
Yeah. What was that, Michael?
Couple points.
A statistic that says, "Hey, gays are voting even more now." And kids and gay people are voting even more now. You better go out to the polls. I mean, we just had the personhood amendment not make it to our ballot.
Yay.
And that was huge because that would have motivated a whole bunch of people to come out and vote, who otherwise wouldn't have any other reason to vote. They would have been, there for that one issue. And things like this get put out, during the presidential election cycle just to get people to the polls.
It does. It makes you really cynical because, they're supposed to be science, and we've, I think, shown enough evidence as to why this, if you want to call it science, it ain't the good science.
Well, let me point out some other issues.
Oh, go.
This article, once again, I mean, they claim not peer-reviewed, and it's clear by how it was published. Typically, these kind of studies take 9 months or longer to become published. They have several rounds of peer review. This had one round of peer review, and it took 3 weeks for it to be published. So once again, it seems like this research, the social science research that paper or magazine or whatever it is that published this, they were part of the agenda here. Because they didn't check it out. They didn't require a lot of peer review, right? And after it's published, they're all going, "Well, it's just a commentary. It's not an actual study." And they're trying to wash their hands of it that way. When the fact of the matter is that they didn't do their due diligence and they published this piece of crap.
And like you said, they did it because they had an agenda to do.
Well, and so the agenda has to be spread to where it was published. And this is supposed to be one of the top sociology journals. So I don't know what that says about them, but it ain't good.
Yeah. And it's too bad. I mean, sociology is one of those softer sciences, and I don't think that soft science needs to be entirely dismissed. It just needs to be taken with a grain of salt sometimes. Because again, you have these things that seem to be talking about individual children, and they're not. They're talking about trends, they're talking about aggregate numbers and stuff like that. And we as human beings don't understand that very well.
Well,
even the scientists don't always understand that well. They get confused as to what's a number and what's a human being.
What if I presented this like this? I said, listen, we've done this study. Here are some trends for people to be aware of so that they could do better.
Well, first it would have to be a longitudinal study.
Which it's not.
It's not. You can't show a trend. All you can show is a snapshot.
And that's another problem with the data, is that it is a snapshot. But I have a huge problem with the fact that it's a questionnaire, and then they're presenting it as evidence of something. I can say whatever I want on that questionnaire. Are you going to verify it?
There's no way to verify it. That's my point that I was making, is that if I were given a questionnaire that asked me how my parents raised me, I'd probably answer in favor of my parents. But, not necessarily accurately, though.
It is interesting that intact families do have that kind of social pressure of there's a lot more family secrets. And one of the things that broken families do is I think, like Mac's kind of suggesting, is it breaks the secrets because basically so much else is broken. Keeping all the dirty laundry in the house is no longer really important. But it is a very real thing. I mean, I do come from a broken household, but I'm a post-18 divorced kid. Mm-hmm. My parents got divorced when I was 20, so I had the standard family growing up. Oh, it was so much better after they got divorced. Because they should have been divorced 10 years beforehand.
Has it driven you to do marijuana?
Yes.
It has. Well, then I think that you fit one of our criteria here.
No, I'm pretty sure I fit a couple of these. But, and that's fine. But again, it's just a lot of things to keep in mind. The format of a questionnaire, like you say, does mean it's all self-reported data. The trend in families, and again, I don't have evidence to back this up. I just have anecdotal evidence. I'll admit that, but I think a lot of people have seen the same thing I have, is that, that family unit will sometimes create an inviolate, you can't speak about the family outside the family kind of thing. When, you have these raging alcoholics where everybody kind of covers for them. And crap like that happens a lot more often in intact families because there's more something to lose. And again, just looking at these numbers that don't seem real. I don't know as I buy the inviolate thing, though. I rarely even wear purple. Well, okay. I take it back. You know me. I wear purple all the time.
Michael?
Okay.
Especially applying that silence to keeping rapes silent, mm-hmm. because it might shame someone in the family. Mm-hmm. There are certain more progressive families that would never tell a child to remain silent about it, and never tell them that they have shame, Mm-hmm. And that would really bring out something different in this study if we could look at that effect on those numbers, as far as
if we're really going to
children being raped more.
Well, yes, exactly. Yeah, so they want to show that unintact families are more, that there's more rape going on, but they didn't ask how many abortions they were having. I mean, if we're going to do it and we really want to bias it, let's go all the way.
Yeah.
So, ultimately, I think the study really doesn't tell us much.
And again, I think the fact that it's trying to be used for basically suggesting how laws should go is just really disingenuous and stupid. Like you say, it shouldn't affect things. Like I said, even if you show that every single kid that comes out of a gay household is screwed up beyond measure, and again, I don't believe that, but even if you had that evidence, it doesn't mean you shouldn't allow for same-sex marriage, because marriage isn't about raising children. So it's got this, it jumps on a bandwagon that I think if we don't point it out, we are complicit in allowing it to roll down the street.
Right. Here's the other thing is that, let's say that they asked, children that were raised by either a lesbian or a gay couple about their sexual orientation. Let's say they're more likely to be gay. Is it because they were raised by heterosexual or non-heterosexual parents, or is it because they're just more honest about their actual sexual proclivities?
Well, right. There's an honesty thing there. There's also if they're the biological child of this of at least one of the members of the same-sex couple, then there's a genetic component to sexual orientation. You probably have it.
Sure.
You're far more likely.
How many people are living in denial over it because they don't want to tell their parents and stuff? There is that. And, if the parents are going to be honest, probably the kids are going to be more likely to be honest. Yeah. It's how they're raised.
Right. So
And another question I'd love to see on a report like this is, how often have you degraded another person because they're different from you? Put a question like that in there. Ask. See if people are going to answer honest, because I would be willing to bet the kids raised by non-traditional parents are probably less likely to, because in their minds, you don't, they're different enough. You see people that are different, you don't go after them.
Yeah.
And I'd love to see a question like that in one of these studies.
And they do point out some differences in race in the conclusion. And one is that they say that whites are less likely to have children, where minorities are more likely to have children. So they did get into some race stuff in here too, in these demographics.
Well, I know there's some issues that the black culture is less accepting of homosexuality.
Sure.
I've heard that, but there's some cultural stuff like that here and there. Like, it is race related.
But I don't feel like they even really touched the things that I thought were important for a study like this.
Right.
And maybe that's because I'm not a sociologist.
Yeah. Well, I don't think they cared about the important stuff. They were just, we've said it. They were trying. It sounds like they were trying for a very direct association with everything, saying this is perfect, everything else is wrong.
And Brian, you're not a sociologist, so clearly you don't know what's important. You're a geologist, and they didn't ask in this study what kind of rocks are involved.
Well, and there's no seismic survey either, and so I have a real problem even, digesting the research.
Seismic doesn't matter.
Well, I mean, that's important. Seismic. Yeah, so I guess, but I don't think, and I wish I had a sociologist to ask about this. But I mean, Michael is the closest that I can get, with a psychologist, right? I mean, are my factors important?
I believe so.
And did they cover any of them?
Not well enough, if they even touched there. And I think part of that has to do with the scope of the study being too limited and it needing a lot of follow-up. For every question you answer, you get 3 more, and we're focusing on the 3 more from this obviously small in scope study that's trying to bash gay families.
Right. Well, and they got $35,000 from a biased source who they claim didn't influence the research.
I mean, all scientists say that, and it's a reason we constantly have the discussion as to, so where'd you get your money from?
Exactly.
It seems to always be very, very important to the
I wanted to throw in here also that the groups that are using the study to further their agenda, can't we kind of always rely on those groups to misuse scientific data anyway?
Yes.
Because they have such infrequent use of it, because they only drag it out when it helps them.
Right.
And they fervently deny it every other time.
And science doesn't help them that often.
Right.
Because usually it proves them wrong.
Yeah. So they have
Anyway.
they don't have a lot of experience with it. And like I said, I too would love to have a sociologist talk about this, because I don't know what they generally look at. It seems like it's impossible to run a really, really good sociological study that would hit all of these things. Because, like you say, anybody coming at this would have their own feelings of what's important. And I don't know you could, in a finite amount of time, ask every possible question and then have enough apples to compare to apples, sort out the oranges and all that kind of.
Well, that's kind of why you have to limit the scope. And I think that trying to address this on 40 different criteria points might be unrealistic, at least for, even as preliminary as this study was.
So do you think we've talked this one to death?
I think so. And I just want to say in conclusion that these things are a reality and we can't legislate against them. We have to accept them and try to help people best we can. And it's unfortunate that these kinds of studies are being misused in such a way that doesn't further that agenda. And maybe it's just my agenda that I want to help people as best I can.
Right.
And not everybody does. But what I would want from these kinds of studies is data points to say, listen, these are statistically more likely, be aware of them, and let's see if we can help you. Other than that, I hate that these are being used for people to try and say, well, gays shouldn't adopt, which I think is wrong. Why? I mean, we can't show any demonstrable harm from it, so why would we deny these people the ability to raise a child? I think it's unfair that it's even being used that way. But
and I'll say it again. I know I'm like a broken record. And if we are going to start having studies to figure out what people should legally be allowed to do with their children and not, then it needs to be applied to everybody. I saw a bumper sticker the other day that I enjoyed that basically it was a gay sticker that asked, when do I get to vote on your marriage?
Right. And
You know, if we're going to vote on who should get married and who shouldn't, then it needs to be applied to everybody. This selective crap is garbage. And to you, again, like I said before, if the study came out and said that every single child is in worse situation, it still should not affect the legality of it. To your point, it is going to happen because it has been happening and will continue to happen. People will raise children just without all of the legal benefits that they should be entitled to as citizens of this country.
What?
So the idea that we're going to scientifically discover whether or not you in particular should be able to adopt a child based on scientific studies just seems wrong. Like I said, if they were going to do it that way, they should never give a child to somebody who's been divorced, even if they're remarried and had children after that. I mean, you know what I'm saying? Like, it's just not the way that anything else works. But when it comes to this one topic, suddenly, you know, it's all about the evidence and it's all about, you know, well, think of the
Right.
children, what's the harm, blah, blah, blah. And we don't do that on any other topic. And until we do, we shouldn't do it on this one.
the other thing is that this does show that children of adopted parents don't fare as well as biological too. So now it should be illegal to divorce and it should be illegal to adopt. If you have a child, you have to raise it now.
Yeah. And you can't die before they come of age, apparently, because
Apparently
Well,
they-
they have to be killed with
You
you.
don't think they'd love that as part of their agenda? That you can't divorce and you can't adopt, and if you have a child, you have to raise it?
Do you think Newt Gingrich is really going to vote that into office, into law? He's on his
That he
fourth
can't get
fucking
divorced?
marriage. Yeah.
Yeah, he's no
I know,
trial.
these idiots, and again, even look at this, look at demographics. Look at those states that have the highest divorce rates. Red every goddamn time. Okay?
I'm sorry,
They do
I
not
think
practice what they preach. They're a bunch of
John
liars.
McCain. There's several high up there Republicans who are on multiple wives, and quite often they've divorced their wives because they were sickly and stuff. Like, oh well, you're too old. I'm going to move on to a younger one. So the Republicans themselves that are going to use this are generally the ones who basically are the case against it because they're the ones who have messed up the sanctity of marriage.
All right. We've talked this one to
We're
death,
done.
and now we're just jabbering.
Yeah.
All right.
Okay.
Well, that's good. So next week, Michael is going to join us again, and we're going to talk about the Atheism Plus controversy.
And me and Brian,
There's something better than standard atheism now?
Exactly. Yes.
And
Brian
I
and
thought you guys were really happy as atheists. Now you have to have atheism plus?
Who's your god?
We just really wanted a cross sign in our logo. That's
Yeah,
all.
exactly. Yeah, that's exactly what it was.
I'm polyagnostic. There's a bunch of gods that I don't know if I believe in or not.
that works. But both Brian and myself have been fairly active on my Facebook page, people. We want you to check that out, leave input, get involved in some of our discussions there. We have articles and other stuff being linked to there.
Yep.
So.
And welcome my YouTube listeners. This is fantastic. Michael has been helping me promote the YouTube channel, and so I've been I've got the podcast up on YouTube, and so there's one more way for people to listen to the podcast, and that's on YouTube. So, you can check us out there as well. If you want to hear us instantly, instead of waiting to download it, check out YouTube.
You know, if you guys say you've been active on your Facebook page, I've got Brian's word that he hasn't burned any damn calories doing it, so he hasn't been that active.
He hasn't what?
He hasn't been that active.
He hasn't burned any calories, so he can't have been that active.
You cannot. You can't be
calories.
active.
Aren't you used to his humor by now?
I just didn't hear it. I apologize.
Hey, did you guys hear about the guy that was cut in half? Huh? He's all right now.
Oh, that's bad. That's bad.
All right. Say goodnight, everybody.
Good night, everybody.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to the Amateur Skeptics podcast. For more information about the Amateur Skeptics, go to amateurskeptics.com. To send us feedback, suggestions, or big flaming insults, feel free to contact us at WTF@amateurskeptics.com. Other contact information can be found on our website.
You can leave a voicemail for the Amateur Skeptics podcast at 720-295-7785. Music for this podcast was provided by OFM. To find out more about OFM, go to myspace.com/OFMHQ. This podcast is released under a Creative Commons, No Derivatives 3.5 license. Thank you for listening to the Amateur Skeptics podcast.
Amateur Skeptics website, Facebook, and podcast album art is provided by and copyright Shadow Knight Digital Portraiture. Larger prints or custom pieces are available upon request.